Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the PDS vConnect 2020. We're delighted that you're here. We have a great lineup of speakers, panelists, and tremendous content. We're going to inform you, educate you, and we're going to entertain you. And most of all, we're going to help you get connected. And we're going to do all of that before lunch. After that, you're on your own. Enjoy the conference, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk to you about the lessons that we are learning as we go through this COVID era. This has been quite a year, as you would probably agree. Over 33 million infected with the COVID virus. Over 1 million lives lost. Historical unemployment even in the most robust and advanced economies of the world. Unprecedented dislocation of workers. Food supply that has been hampered all over the world. Profound disruption of supply chains. And customers have been forced to change their behavior. No wonder leaders are re-examining their assumptions about what does it mean to be a leader? And what does it mean to have a business performing at its peak? As I talk with my peers and other leaders in the industry, read and learn about the transformation our industry is going through, it's becoming increasingly evident that even the boldest of leaders are re-examining their discussions about how to face this unique moment in history and how to lead their organizations. Even though we know the pandemic may have catalyzed this shift in thinking, the impacts are going to be profound and felt for a very long time. There are three fundamental shifts that are occurring in how leaders are thinking as a result of the last 6 months of experience. One, the leaders are not only thinking bigger and effecting changes faster, they're thinking different. They're realizing the critical importance that leaders have to exhibit emotional intelligence and show empathy at workplace. And lastly, leaders are one more time recognizing that the success of the business, success of the shareholders is very much tied to the success of the broader stakeholders and the community that they live in. Stakeholders like employees, partners, customers, suppliers, and the community that they live in. This pandemic is truly an inflection point, and some have likened it to World War II. This sounds like an exaggeration, but really it isn't. When we, the US, decided to enter World War II, we were still reeling from the Great Depression. Unemployment was above 25%, and the average standard of living for an American was below 60% pre-depression. As we sent our men to the war and retooled the factories to create products and goods and services to heed the call of the time, many of the female workers took those jobs. All of a sudden, overnight, the unemployment rate fell to below 10%. The employment rate for female workers actually shot through the roof, and it was all-time high. The innovations that we experienced during the war years served subsequently for decades to fuel our industrial economy. The disruption caused by this pandemic is a clear parallel here. And there's a recognition among leaders that learning from this pandemic should not go to waste. because it has the potential to impact our businesses and our society in the most profoundly positive ways. The pace and the magnitude of dislocation caused by this pandemic is forcing the leaders to move away from their traditional linear thinking and face the nonlinear reality of the complex world that is becoming even more complex. We've not seen this velocity of change in a generation. Organizations have already accomplished during this pandemic what had previously been thought impossible. In 1 week, companies went from 100,000 employees working from offices to working from home. This shift in policy and systems would have not been possible or would have taken at minimum years to accomplish. Information technology has made it possible to provide healthcare to remote patients. This technology has existed for years, if not for decades. But the adoption has been very, very slow because of several hurdles like cost, access, availability, compliance. Traditionally, patients were allowed to televisit their primary care physicians, but only for certain conditions. Reimbursement was almost always lower for those televisits than equivalent in-person visits. And cumbersome regulations imposed by federal, local, and state authorities were making it difficult for years. When this pandemic hit, all of those barriers came tumbling down. One hospital CIO recently told me that in 2019, during the entire year, they had 2,000 total televisits. As March of this year, they were doing 5,000 of those visits a week, a goal that they had set to achieve over the next several years, and they were able to achieve it in less than a month. Teladoc, which is a multinational telemedicine company, is reporting 15,000 televisits a day. I was recently talking with an administrator of one of the largest hospitals in Michigan, and she told me, and I quote, "We have changed so much after COVID-19. I don't believe we will ever go back to the ways of before COVID. We will not have hundreds of patients waiting in the waiting room." And the data in the industry proves it. More and more healthcare institutions are adopting new and different ways to take care of patients, including telemedicine. In 2019, the total number of televisits to the doctor was roughly 50 million during the entire year of 2019. Right now, the projections are that that number will be above 1 billion. That's more than an order of magnitude increase, and this trend is very much likely to continue. Retail is another example of fast-changing world during the COVID-19 era. Prior to the pandemic, several retailers tried curbside pickup for months on a small select set of their stores. Whole Foods, that has close to 500 stores nationwide, and Best Buy, that has twice as many stores in North America, close to 1,000 stores. They went to curbside pickup. They rolled out that program in less than 2 days. And there are numerous others that followed suit. There's so many other examples of rapid acceleration of technological development after the COVID hit. In Wuhan, China, when the pandemic hit, robots were deployed to deliver medicine, supplies, and food to those who were quarantined in hospitals, in hotels, in other special facilities. In faraway places as Mongolia, drones have been deployed to spray COVID-19 disinfectant all over the country. 3D printing manufacturing has taken off like never before for creating, for example, personal protective equipment like customized face masks in mass quantities. A small startup in India recently prototyped a small ventilator in less than 8 days from conceptualization, used a remote 3D printing capabilities to produce hundreds, if not thousands of them to be distributed in Mexico within a matter of days. An infrared capable camera mounted on a helmet can detect a temperature of over 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, in a person 16 feet away. This camera also has artificial intelligence and facial recognition capabilities, so it can instantly display the identity of the individual. Now, this technology was developed in China, so read into it as you may, but you have to marvel at the technology. And researchers at Brigham and Women's Hospital and MIT created a reusable mask specifically targeted at healthcare workers. Made of silicone rubber, it can be very quickly sterilized and reused multiple times. It's been manufactured and specifically provided to the healthcare workers in the country. We've all seen the use of QR codes in restaurants, where you shine your mobile phone on a QR code and up pops the menu. So there's numerous examples, and it's becoming abundantly clear that while this pandemic has tremendous health and economic shock around the world, it has catalyzed a sea of change, sea of unprecedented change, to find ways to mitigate this contagion. And it's giving rise to development of new technologies, new uses of the existing technologies, new insights, and new business models. I sat down with some of the industry leaders recently to talk about these shifts in thinking. And here's part of my conversation.
Many have always said that never let a disaster go to waste, and use the occasion to be creative and innovative. And I go back to our aspirations of a digital transformation. Many of us were planning those efforts into the future with a 3 to 5 year horizon, but all of a sudden we had an opportunity here. IT technology stepped up in this pandemic. There was an insatiable appetite for information. We were able to respond quickly, build portals, build PPE supply chains, build dashboards, build a lot of things that maybe have taken us 12 to 24 months to build, but we were building those in weeks, days and weeks. We were able to respond. So if the business were convinced of anything, was the ability of talented IT people to bring to the forefront all the information that was needed, whether it was the trends in a dashboard or a portal that needed to be designed. We were there being able to deliver very quickly. It's amazing that how much was done in such a short period of time under duress. But the IT organizations, not just my organization, but I think both in public and private sector, out of survival, had to meet these needs and had to be able to deliver the information that was required. I think the citizens and the customers of our country demanded leadership to fill that vacuum and to deliver results that they were confident that was based on facts. So I truly look back at this opportunity to do things differently, to be thinking about the digital transformation, to be able to utilize data analytics, to be able to build the information that was required by everyone to make the appropriate decisions.
One of the most obvious is in all cases, all the employees of each of our 13 companies, plus Mason Wells, being a 14th company, have moved to working remotely for those employees who can work remotely. And I think if you would have asked me 9 months ago if I thought that could occur as actually seamlessly as it seems to have occurred for Mason Wells, most closely from my perspective, and then through the interaction I have with CEOs of our portfolio companies like you, I really have been amazed at how seamlessly they all moved to that. At Mason Wells, we did that starting Monday, March 16th. We made the decision to do that the Friday before, and we held our 8 a.m. Administrative meeting on that Monday, 3 days after making the decision, and it went off without a hitch. And what I've heard from most of our portfolio companies is they had very similar experiences. So from that standpoint, I've been amazed at how seamlessly this all occurred.
In periods of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, people look to their leaders for direction and for inspiration. They look for reassurance that we can deal with the situation. They look for support, and especially emotional support. They look for guidance on how to prepare for unforeseen circumstances. They expect their leaders to be perfect and often forget that leaders are also human beings. Leaders have to provide guidance, direction, and vision. But this pandemic has taught us that it is equally important for leaders to show their humanity and their vulnerability. The more we do that, show our vulnerability and our humanity, the more we receive it in return, the more we see empathy and trust from others. A recent research report summarized it very nicely and simply. It said, elevate to be to the same level as to do. Now, what does that mean? The point is that as leaders, we all carry an ever-growing list of action items, things we must get done. But this pandemic has exposed that in disruptive times like these, it is equally important for leaders to be aware of their way of being. In other words, it's as important how we show up as it is what we get done. This forced virtualization has created another opaque layer that's hindering our ability to collaborate. And it's making it very difficult for leaders to know exactly what's going on in their team's lives, work lives, personal lives. So in order to effectively deal with this opacity, we have to find ways to maintain connection with our team members across and up and down the organization. This challenge is not new, but the context certainly is. So how do leaders address this challenge in this profoundly altered context? Yeah, it's become very clear that we need leaders with broader set of general skills, not just business skills, to effectively deal with disruptions, whether they're caused by evolutionary technology or unimagined pandemics. Last 6 months have proven that working virtually works, and productivity is not an issue. We can be productive in a virtual environment. All indications are that this remote work or some hybrid version of it is here to stay for the long haul. Obviously, it raises questions like, how do we foster teamwork that has been physically dislocated? How do we ensure compliance across a virtual team? And how do we deal with supply chain that has changed overnight and is constantly evolving? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure employee engagement when much of the team is invisible much of the time? All this is pretty much new. And traditionally, leaders have not been trained to deal with situations like these or address these questions. And therefore, they must develop these general skills, including empathy and perspective, which we have come to know as emotional intelligence. This pandemic has renewed our perspective that as leaders, we're not in charge, contrary to what we might like to believe. We are not in charge. We take care of people that actually produce business results. Leaders' job is to enable, empower, and support those who produce business outcomes. It also means giving credit, full credit, to those who produce results, and also taking full responsibility and accountability when things do not go well. This requires the leader not only have high IQ, but deep EQ, the empathy quotient. At no point in our history has this been more important for leaders to have and demonstrate empathy. And this is that time. In many ways, our current environment actually makes it easier for us to do that. In my case, as we move to the virtual environment, my colleagues have met my family, they've met my wife, they've seen my dog, they've seen him bark. They've been to my house, they've been to my patio, they've been to my study. I dress more casually than I ever have. I think it's personal, and I think it's nice. I like it. A couple of my colleagues recently commented that it was nice to see me in a hoodie. This lockdown has surprisingly opened up unexpected opportunities for all of us to show more of us, to show up at workplace and show our vulnerability and show our humanity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a good thing. I recently discussed these issues with some industry leaders, and this is what they said.
I think that's very important. If there's anything in leadership behavior that has to accentuate is the fact that you connect with your employees and that you empathize with their home environment. Traditionally, and in the past, 8 to 5, loosely defining the workday, has expanded 24/7 because they cannot sit in front of their computer from 8 to 5. They've got distractions, they've got a spouse that's working, they have children that are doing e-learning. So they're getting their job done, but you cannot confine it to 8 to 5. So you have to be able to understand that you're tracking the results and you're not clocking their time. Now, this is some leaders believe that I must see you working for you to be determined that I'm getting what I need out of you. That paradigm shift has got to change for those type of leaders. They can't punch the clock at 8 o'clock, although you could track keystrokes, you could connect, you could track the connectivity time, but that is no way of being able to manage a remote workforce. You have to trust, you have to have empathy, that there are distractions in the home that they have to deal with from a family point of view. As we said, and as we know, everyone is in the home under the same roof 24/7. Nobody's going anywhere. They're not going to work and they're not going to school. So basically you have to track the result and you have to empathize with the social dynamics that are going on in the home. If the person is a single person living in a home or an apartment all by themselves, okay. But I think that's a bit of an anomaly where most people are married and have children in the home. and that might be the majority of your workforce. So if you're having to understand the circumstances for each single person or each family member, you have to accommodate that as a leader.
People take their cues for how they should feel from the leader a lot in a work setting. And if a leader is coming across as with the to-do list, then they can be perceived as being less empathetic, not checking in with their teams of how are you doing? And there's a balance, between over checking in and checking in the right amount. And that's different for every team. And that also goes to just being real and asking what people need rather than making assumptions. I think leadership in the past, what I would see were more assumptions, whereas now employees are expecting that leaders are going to ask them what their needs are, and rather than just kind of, moving on business as usual. Deep care is one of our values. And so we frequently talk in our meetings about what does deep care look like. And that could become a behavior, but it's not something that we insist everyone has to do the same behavior. It's more around what does deep care look like? What are all the different facets that deep care could look like for our clients, for each other, in our families? Like, how do we embody what deep care is? And that can really look behaviorally a little bit different for each person, but the core motivation of showing deep care doesn't have to change.
The third shift in thinking that the pandemic has put a spotlight on is the idea of inclusion. And I don't mean necessarily diversity and inclusion. I mean something broader than that. The concept is that a business cannot fully succeed by solely focusing on the interest of the shareholders, that it must take into account the interest of broader stakeholder community, the employees, the customers, the partners, the suppliers, and the community that they live in. This idea is actually not new, but the pandemic has undoubtedly reaffirmed the interconnectedness of business with its broadest set of stakeholders. This pandemic immediately activated the leadership into planning and action. And what did they all do? They all actually came up with a 3-item action plan. Take mitigating actions to secure employees' safety and their health. Lock down the facilities, enable the employees to work remotely, and immediately institute policies and guidelines to help ensure their safety and health. Number 2, ensure business continuity as best as possible and minimize any disruption to service and goods delivery to their clients. And number 3, list specific action items to ensure the health of the business, at least for the immediate term. And this spanned from ensuring liquidity to resizing the business to the realities of the market, all the way to fundamentally changing the business model or any combination of the 3. Now, to inform their decision, all leaders came up with 3 scenarios. The worst scenario, the best case scenario, and the most likely scenario. And as they chose the scenario they wanted to execute, at every turn, they ran into the stakeholders. As they implemented safety and risk mitigation policies for the employees to ensure their health, they recognized that their employees' health was connected to their family's health, and the family was connected to the community. The same holds true for interactions with customers, partners, suppliers. If a supplier or a partner is not doing well, or at worst failing, it is undoubtedly going to impact my business. So I must take their health into account. This interconnectedness has always existed, but it has different and unique implication within the context of serious health issues that are imposed by COVID-19. This recognition of interconnectedness of business with the broader stakeholder is manifesting in remarkable ways. And let me give you a couple of quick examples. Feeding America, which is the largest food bank in the nation with almost 200 affiliates across the country, recently said that during this pandemic, 1 out of 6 Americans cannot find food and they need to be fed. 1 out of 6 Americans, ladies and gentlemen. That's 55 million Americans that don't know where the next meal is going to come from. A couple months ago, Feeding America, this organization, said that they were experiencing a shortfall of $1.5 billion for the next 6 months. So far, to the end of June, 2 billion meals have been served. And according to Feeding America, we need 6 billion more meals before the year is over. They point out people that are hungry today will be hungry tomorrow and the day after. And we have to figure out a way to address that situation. So what is corporate America doing about that? The news is actually very, very encouraging. According to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, at the outset of COVID-19, in March of this year, 30 US corporations donated almost $900 million to help feed the hungry people in the US. This is the largest contribution to date by this small set of corporations. And it continues. We expect that this amount will actually continue to increase throughout the rest of the year. I'll give you a few more examples. A large consumer goods company recently donated the largest amount they've ever donated in history, $580 million in working capital to small suppliers. Working capital is money needed for suppliers to actually continue to run their business. Largest contribution ever made. A tech giant, and in this case it happens to be one of the large social media companies, recently donated $100 million, donated for 30 small businesses to keep them afloat. 3 of the largest internet service providers in the country are providing free broadband access to low-income families or people that have lost their jobs, or the parents of K through 12 students who cannot otherwise afford broadband. 6 large US technology giants have donated piles of N95 masks to the local healthcare service providers. We all know there's been a shortage of those PPE, including masks. These companies used their own stockpiles that they had kept for their emergencies and donated those to the local healthcare service providers. 3 of the largest US banks are giving out grants, offering deferred payments, and very attractive terms on loans. This clearly demonstrates that there is a renewed recognition in corporate America of the interconnectedness of businesses and the broader stakeholders, and that businesses recognize that the stakeholders must succeed before their businesses can succeed long-term. I recently discussed this matter with a few of the industry leaders, and here's part of my discussion with them.
Education enlightens, science discovers, art inspires, but business creates. And business is really about the creation of value. Now, I think the thing I liked about that as well is it spoke that in a healthy community, you need the arts, you need the sciences, you need education, you need business. They're all part of a healthy community. And that as business, you've got a responsibility to be engaged in your community. You've got to be you've got a responsibility to continually create value, and that gives you the reason to exist. And in some ways, anytime you take a single path, if you say it only exists for shareholders, you're narrowing what you can ultimately do. Just like if you say, I'm going to ignore that and only create for a customer, you risk narrowing yourself down to something that will ultimately become irrelevant. And so I think if you remain grounded on that the role of business is to create, and then that it plays a role in our society, it allows you to keep this breadth or this width of perspective, and as a leader, manage the complexity that comes with it.
I write a column for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and my most recent column was about Briggs & Stratton, the 100-plus-year-old company that just went into bankruptcy. And it was controversial to begin with. They went into bankruptcy. They gave a retention bonus to their executives rather than make an interest payment. And that's what catapulted them into bankruptcy. And one of the things I wrote about and investigated, and I talked to a lot of former Briggs executives and others, was exactly that idea. And what seems to have happened at that company is that it was all about the shareholders. It was all about the returns for the shareholders, and not about the stakeholders, and not about innovation that would drive the future. So I think it's impossible to only work for the shareholders. It just, long term, you can't do it. I mean, Briggs makes small combustion engines, so they weren't in a great spot, but they continued. I think one of the things I said in this piece was that they did an end market pivot rather than an innovation pivot. And it was driven by shareholder value, creating shareholder value.
Yep, and that's why I think it's so important. Does shareholder value matter? Of course. Does customer growth and satisfaction matter? Absolutely. Does employees and culture matter? You bet. Do vendors matter? Do your community matter? And that's what makes being a leader so complex, is you've got to manage all of that complexity. And I think anytime you pick one, you're just destining yourself to a continually shrinking world. And based on one of the things that Kathleen mentioned before, one of the other things we used to always talk about inside my organizations as well is, you do have to be able to execute and innovate. It's both. It's not one or the other. And if you don't execute well, you go out of business quickly. If you don't innovate, you go out of business slowly. Either way, you're going out of business. So you've got to find a way to do both.
During the Great Recession, there were issues associated, like we have today, with downsizing, managing costs, and managing margins. But we weren't dealing with the health of not only the employees of our businesses, but their extended families. If you have an older parent that you're concerned about, that's impacting your willingness, your desire, your comfort at coming in and accomplishing your job. That dynamic has never existed as long as I've been working, and that has to be factored in on an individual by individual basis. So one person may have the older adult they're concerned about. Another employee of a portfolio company or at Mason Wells may have young children at home that can't go to school, or a chronic health issue. So the compounding effect that occurs and influences the ability of our businesses to operate because the extended family is impacted by this pandemic in a way that's never occurred before is something when initially we started thinking about how do we manage through this, didn't occur to us. And day in and day out, we're learning of employees at portfolio companies who have very unique situations that are impacting their ability to function. And that has exponentially complicated the impact of this pandemic vis-a-vis a financial recession.
I'd like to conclude with what I started with. In a short span of 6 months, COVID-19 has forced us into a unique situation where all of us, especially those of us who are in the leadership positions, to re-examine our assumptions about what is possible and energizing our organizations to accomplish things at speeds never possible before in a lifetime. It has pushed us out of our usual comfort zone, and we've been compelled to change our way of being and show more of our humanity and more of our vulnerability. And it has one more time reaffirmed that the long-term success of our business is strongly tied to the success of our broader stakeholder community. I'm optimistic that these shifts will endure long after the pandemic is over. I invite you to take advantage of the opportunities today in this conference, learn, educate, network, and have some fun. Thank you so very much for your time.